Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Big Bros podcast. My name is Ilan, and I'm joined by my lovely friend and co-host Jeremy. But more importantly, we are delighted to be joined by Tom Boyd, number one AFL draft pick, 2016 Western Bulldogs Premiership Hero, author, speaker, community engager, and overall mental health advocate. Tom, thanks for coming on.
And genuine big brother, you know?
A genuine big brother. How old are you?
30, but 6'7", and hard to find people who are actually big brothers to me. Let's say I don't think I've met too many people bigger than me in my life, but every now and again you come across a unicorn in the wild.
If you had to go back to 18-year-old version of you, knowing what you know, what would you tell him?
You're not that special, mate. Would be my first piece of advice, which everyone's always surprised with, but. I think there's a difference between being special and thinking you're special. In my experience, I certainly have lived a very unique existence. And in many ways, my footballing career and the things that I've done subsequent to that are very off the reservation when it comes to a typical life. But at the same time, even with that as context, like so much of the things that I've been through, so many of the issues that I've faced, so much of the way that those issues arose, all that stuff is super common, and it's so common for young people and people more generally. And it's a real reflection, I think, of the way that we've approached any of these challenges when it comes to mental health in our country, and I'd say largely across the world, which is to say that we typically just try and, as people, kick the can down the road. And we have a real hesitation, I think, around the concept that other people probably get what we're going through in some way, shape or form. And it doesn't need to be perfect, and it doesn't need to be exact, and they don't need to be us to understand who we are as people. And then equally, I think it's that, never-ending drive to want to succeed. On top of that, that really causes these very stereotypical examples where people who are pushing themselves in all facets of life, and that's not a success factor. That's just you've got kids, you've got family, you've got life, you've got work, you've got issues to deal with. You keep pushing and pushing whilst these issues continue to grow, and eventually you sort of hit a point where it becomes very difficult to deal with all of that at once, and often it's too difficult for a lot of people to deal with it all.
The idea of being special, though, you mentioned there that you would tell yourself that you're not that special, but that whole idea of being special is, I feel like, often something that we are told to tell ourselves, especially in the mental health space, especially when we want to build up our self-esteem. So that idea of saying you're not so special, where did that come from, and why are you telling yourself that?
Well, there's a difference between saying you're valuable than you're special, right? So you're valuable. Each person has intrinsic value to provide to the world. If you think everyone's equal, and if you think everyone has that, then that certainly resonates as the case. However, that doesn't mean that the difference that we go through in life and the different circumstances and environments, we either believe that, people are, relatively speaking, going through a lot of the same challenges. And I'm not saying the challenges are similar in circumstance, but they're similar in the fact that, to put it as simply as possible, people have really good days and people have really bad days, and people have issues that arise typically at the worst point in their lives and with the worst timing that they don't know how to deal with. And if you look at it through that prism rather than, hey, we're all unique, which, great, everyone's unique, everyone gets a pat on the back and a sticker for being themselves. And I mean that, that's awesome. However, if we can't find common ground about how to actually learn from each other, well, then we're all going to wander through the darkness individually in life as people that can't learn from each other. And that's just not the case, right? We've all learned from other people across the course of our lifetimes. And we do that through the prism of education or academia or apprenticeships. But at the end of the day, someone wrote all that stuff down. Someone created that. And that was just one person's perspective based on a varying degree of information. And it's the same with this stuff. Like, the more that I thought about myself when I was younger was, hey, you made a massive impact on the field as a young player before getting drafted. You get taken pick one, you break your contract in the first year, you sign a $7 million contract at the age of 19, you win a premiership for a club who hasn't won one in 62 years, then you retire at 23. There's not a single person on earth that I would be able to go through and say, hey, have you been through this before? If that was the way that I was thinking about it. And when I was playing and when I was younger, that's the way I did think about it. Like, how is this person going to be able to show empathy for someone with such a unique existence. And at the end of the day, it's a fallacy. It's not true.
I mean, connected to that, I think it wouldn't have been uncommon for people who aren't educated on the adverse impacts of poor mental health to be like, well, this guy was a professional athlete, top of his game, had just won the ultimate success on great money. A lot of people don't understand that, you're still fallible in those areas. You're still not going to necessarily have the most robust mental health. Like, those two things can be separate. Yeah, they can relate to one another, but in your case, how did you go about navigating that area, that space, and telling yourself that, yeah, those two things are separate? And I suppose, did you feel like you had to convince others as well that those two things were separate?
Yeah, there's probably like a few parts to your question. The first thing I would say is that people don't tend to reckon with this stuff until they have to, which is the problem. And in my case, my solution to any of the issues that I was facing, which, to be clear, were basically surrounding sleep, anxiety, and depression. My solution was just get successful enough and it won't matter, right? Sort of like, in my head, I had a strange vision of like, if you have these bad things in the mix, we'll just make the mix bigger and then it doesn't matter as much. It's like a ratio. It's not, I'm like, which is dumb, but that's the way I thought about it. And unfortunately, I found out very quickly after my greatest success on the field in 2016 that wasn't the case, and that all of these issues that have been percolating and hidden behind the scenes just came through and basically knocked me out in 2017. And I think that was a very important learning point to me. And I think about it in the context of normal people, right? So people who aren't going through, obviously, that, again, unique experience. And it comes up all the time. Like, we're recording this, obviously, at the start of December. The number one thing you're going to hear from people, by the way, including me, because everyone's a hypocrite, is, I just need to get to Christmas and everything will be okay, right? Or I just got to get through this next promotion or next busy period or next week. It doesn't matter. But all that anyone's saying is, in some way, shape, or form, they understand that there is an issue that is behind the scenes that they know they need to deal with. And their admission is, until I get to the next point, I'm not going to be able to do that. I don't feel capable, comfortable, or clear in being able to do so. And all that does to the individual and to everyone around them is just kick the can down the road. And invariably, in almost every excuse that we come up with, life gets harder when we actually get to that next thing. And for me, that was exactly the case. Now, as you progress through life, I think you sort of start to get to the point where, when I first announced this stuff, and I didn't do it by choice, contrary to some popular opinion, I kind of had to do it because I didn't have a lot of options left because it had gotten that bad. And you try and explain to people that, subjective success doesn't equal, objective happiness. And I think for me, I'd grown up in a world where what we consider as contributing to happiness is pretty simple. It's things like a nice house and a nice car and a nice family and a nice job and a nice life and whatever. And every year, if you actually critically look back at the time when I was growing up, a lot of those people who had everything going for them ended up in really tricky spots at some stage, because, again, you're only sort of looking at one layer of the conversation.
It's funny you mentioned that as well, because a lot of people also over-identify with their success and the material achievements that they have. In your case, was there that over-identification going on?
Don't think so. I think over-reliance rather than identification. Like, as in, I was very much relying on the validation of people, surrounding me. And by the way, like, totally understandable when you look back and you go, this was a 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kid who was basically getting, ripped pillar to post every week in the newspaper because I signed a contract that a club had offered me. And I think that, because I was getting such negative validation, it made sense to chase the positive stuff because maybe it would offset it and everything would be okay, sort of thing. But that, really wasn't the case in my experience. And I'd say, interestingly, on the other end of the spectrum, I think people over-identify with their failures just as much, to be honest. And, in particular, working in the mental health space, I think that we have a thing that we need to consider in the awareness and discussion around this stuff in, particular circles where, you don't want to pathologize this stuff as to being the only thing that matters to people. You know, we're trying to normalize the fact that we all deal with it, not that everyone should have some major attraction to this issue defining their lives. Like, we're trying to help people get to their potential. We're trying to help people be their best, be their happiest, achieve the life and live the life that they want to live. And if you're stuck in those failures and you're stuck in those challenges that you have, and that's who you are as a person, it's very, very difficult to do that.
We know that tall poppy syndrome is one of those major characteristics of Australia, something that, you would not be a stranger to experiencing yourself. So when people are saying, and you're reading those news articles, but, people are maybe keyboard worrying you and saying to your face, you're on X amount of money, you're playing in a flag, you're playing a good side. There is no reason why you should be feeling bad about yourself. What did you say to that?
Well, firstly, I don't think I've ever heard anyone use warrior as a verb, but that was quite trying to get that out. What did I say to that? Look, to be honest, most of the tall poppy stuff, like, I actually don't think it relates to specifics. Like, the concept of tall poppy syndrome, there's another quote which I think I got from, I swear to God, I think this quote is in Too Fast, Too Furious, or Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, right?
Okay.
But I can't say it because it's in Japanese. But essentially the saying is, the nail that sticks out gets hammered, right? Okay. The person who stands out, the person who's different, that's the people want to trim them back. And that's what tall poppy syndrome is. So it's actually not relevant in my perspective that, what I was famous for, or what I was the tall poppy for. It was the fact that I was, and that's why people dragged you down. And the reason why I say that is not to say like, oh, Tom's famous. The reason I say that is because the same people that tore me down when I wasn't playing my best footy were the same ones who tore me down and made excuses for, why we didn't deserve a premiership in 2016, or what, it was the umpires, or it was the week off, or whatever other rubbish they came up with. And the same people who, when I was driving on the back of a Hilux in the grand final parade the day before a grand final, that I still hear people abusing me from the audience and from the crowd about my contract. They're the same. All these people are the same. And they're the same people that when I took time off and later gave back over $2 million, it doesn't matter. None of that shit matters. It's all the same. It's all the same people. And this is the persons whose story is rising to the top. I'm going to be against all of that. Now, obviously, when we're talking about financial outcomes, fame and success, those things get exacerbated, right? Because people have a genuine affliction to those two, say, parts of the poppy, if you will. And again, they can use whatever justification that they like, but the question that you ask back to them is, what would have you done in the same situation? Give me an example of an 18-year-old kid who would have turned down the third biggest or the second biggest deal in AFL history, and I'll show you a liar, right? It never happens. But if I tell you to show me someone who actually gave the money back at the end and walked off to do something else, I'll tell you that there's no one else who's done that either. And, at the end of the day, what you want in life is always this. I wish I could be me now when I was playing footy, so I could say all of the things that I know that I needed to say back then to these people, and not live in any of the regret for feeling, let's say, less than capable to deal with that stuff at the time. But that's not how life works. Life is always a retrospective view of what you've experienced beforehand. And for me, I don't live in the past like that because, there's 1,000 things I got wrong, just to name a few.
Would that one sentence be, what would you do in my situation?
There's a few other ones that I might use, which I won't say on this call.
You can.
I just don't say them. I said a few, don't get me wrong, but it's hard to say. So you got to remember, if you're like this, and this, I don't mean this to make this a Tom pity party, because people shouldn't feel sorry for me at all. But you have to understand that the level of scrutiny was me not being able to walk into the supermarket without being abused by people. It was me not being able to drive down the street, my partner not feeling safe, my now wife and mother of my almost 2 children.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes. It's an interesting world to raise kids in at the moment. It's my parents being, accosted and abused by people. Like, it's all this stuff it's hard to explain to people the severity, because people would just not fathom that it happens. And so when you ask me the one sentence, like, it's kind of like you argue with an idiot and no one can tell the difference. Have you ever heard that saying? One of my favorites. And there's no point. There's no point to being able to say the one thing, because it just doesn't exist in the real world.
Who was your big brother then? Because you were 23, like you mentioned, and you said at the start of the episode, there are not many, if any, people that have gone through this same scripture of what you went through. So who was your big brother in quotations at the time, or those people that you somewhat felt like you were able to lean on to get you through it?
Yeah, I don't know if I had a big brother. I mean, I had my big dad. My father has always been sort of the man in my eyes, and he's my hero. Always has been. Always been the person who supported me and challenged me and all of that sort of stuff. But in terms of the public eye, I mean, Mitch Wallace would be certainly the one that I was closest with through a lot of this period, and we played a pretty pivotal role through challenges on both sides of the spectrum. You got to remember that Mitch broke his leg in 2016 and missed out on a grand final after being basically a Bulldogs supporter since he was born, and looking at his father running around as captain of the club in his previous history. And so, there was a real, and always has been, he's been best man at my wedding. We see each other most weeks and talk to each other every week. And I think having people that are not only aligned in experience, but equally aligned in values and interests as well is it's really hard to find. Like, if you're a person who knows what they like and, have some sort of specific intrigues towards things, and you've got, relatively clear set values and you're relatively consistent, I suppose, in expressing them, then it's very hard to find people that are magically within your workplace that are going to have those same experiences. And so because of this rare moment happening between the two of us, we basically hit it off straight away. And I think more than anything, he's been the one that we've sort of shared issues between the two of us more than anyone that I can recall.
What was Bevo like, and I suppose the rest of the footy department during this whole ordeal for you?
Yeah, the retirement bit was an interesting one. I mean, I don't know. You sort of, the thing that people don't understand about footy clubs, I think, en masse, is like, people think like, probably the number one question I get, so you still do some stuff with the club? I'm like, no, that's not how this works, mate. As soon as you shut the doors in your career, which in my case was on the 19th of May, 2019, as soon as those doors shut, it's done, mate. There's nothing. It's and it's by design, right? Like, you don't want players who have been a part of the club, regardless of how their tenure at the club was, hanging around. This is a go, 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 every eye to the front, and we've got to win this weekend. And so me being around certainly wasn't the case. And I think, that's certainly the feeling that I had when I left. And it was by my choice, right? And it was also not something that I was particularly sad about, which was, hey, I'm ready to move on. You can't have it both ways. You can't have one foot in and one foot out. I needed to make the call, and I did. And then, you basically walk into the next chapter of your life as a brand new person and have to figure everything else out.
There's another element to it as well. There's a lot of conjecture, I suppose, nowadays about people saying, well, football clubs should do more to protect their past players, especially with a lot of AFL athletes or ex-athletes having mental health that is deteriorating and maybe not having as much access to supports. And a lot of people then say, well, the football clubs should therefore be one of those avenues that can provide support. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there's not that many people who are closer to some of this stuff, right? I used to live with one of the guys who passed, Cam McCarthy. And, I think there's two questions you're asking. So there's the clubs providing support when they're there. And by and large, after some significant changes that happened probably, 2025, 7 or 8 years ago, by and large, the support structuring of the clubs is, one, consistent and standardized across the board, but two, it's quite, robust. You got to remember, like, footy clubs are the opposite, even in extreme opposite of a normal business, right? A normal business has, let's say, a ratio of 20% of the people trying to enable 80% of those who are doing the work. So think like your HR and your operations and all of those types of people. In a footy club, it's the opposite. You've got 200 people supporting 45 in doing their job, and that's about it, right? And realistically, it's actually 25 as the players on the weekend and the assistant coaches. And so there is a huge amount of support available at the clubs. And by the way, the AFLPA, our union, do a great job in providing extraordinary access to psychological services, to hardship funds, to medical resources, to you name it, post-footy. We have a really great – but the thing that is critical in this space, and I think, honestly, if you'll give me 15 seconds, this is where the complete misconception of where we should apply our efforts and energy in solving this issue comes to a head. Now, I understand the need and desire for people to provide medical care and psychological. You won't find much of a bigger proponent of a psychologist than me. I had a great experience and it changed my life, saved my life even. But they're just one tool, right? And I don't mean to call them tools. I mean to call them, they are an avenue for support that are applicable in specific scenarios for specific people. But there are a range of other things, and those other things typically populate the online ecosystem, like health and well-being and yoga and breath work or whatever else, right? All positive, not criticizing them at all. But then we don't deal with this massive portion of the problem, right? And I think this is really where we miss the mark. One, human beings need huge amounts of connection. And AFL players, when they walk out of the game, lose for the first time in their life structure and connection with people, right? And in often cases, they get it at the wrong time with pressure on them from their families, pressure on them, not just from, hey, what are we going to do next year, but how are we going to pay the bills? How are the kids going to go to school? Who's going to look after them? Are you going to work? What are you going to do? These are big questions that players have to answer. Then you've got that financial element that I already touched on, which is a massive drop-off for AFL players as we go. And this is our responsibility, right? And not all of us do it well, and not all of us have the same upbringing. We're not as financially literate. But we put ourselves in these positions where we go from super high salaries to much, much lower. And often cases, we haven't planned very well for it, which is quite difficult to do, but it's not impossible. And then on top of that, they get told the most heartbreaking and shattering thing that anyone's ever told in their life, especially when it happens for the first time when you're 26, 27, 28, which is you're not good enough anymore. And overlay that landscape with the fact that you look around and, right, I finished at 23, which is obviously an anomaly, especially given my circumstances. And I go around and I go, my schoolmates, the ones who I grew up with, are on their second promotion. They're going to make whatever amount of money next year, and it's just going to go up. They're set on a course, and they can see the future. They know what they're building for. Yeah, I made a bit of money, but I've got lifetime injuries. I've got maybe some concussion stuff, whatever. And you go, geez, was it all worth it? And if you take that landscape into consideration, it's not that surprising that AFL players struggle post-playing footy. And in many cases, I think most guys would say that the best years of their life are behind them, which at the age of 28 is a horrendous thing to be true.
What's the solution then? Simply, what would you think is the best solution for that to set them up better for the future?
Yeah, I sort of think about this visually, and I'm not exactly sure how this is there's a couple of provisions. One, you can lead a horse to water, right? You can't force these guys to do anything. They are adults and they need to make decisions. That's number one. Number two, the visual representation of what I think is true is we need to try and draw a straight line between them entering the league and exiting. So it's not like a build up and then a proverbial cliff. And what I mean by that is provide them with an ability to progress off the field, which is really challenging. Like I did university when I was playing. And by the end, to actually manage a workload that was actually going to get it done within 4 years or 5 years, I was doing night school 3 nights a week, right? Plus assessment and all this other stuff, right? That's a lot of workload for guys who are, again, coming from someone who's quite lucky, did really well in school, mid-90s in my ATAR, know how to study, know how to work, relatively academic and book smart. That's not possible doing that really if you're doing courses that relate to TAFE and other things and doing construction or whatever other interests. And So people just don't do it because it's too difficult to do so. And I hear the other argument too, by the way, which you're making a lot of money, figure it out. I get it. I'm just looking at this from a person point of view, and having seen so many guys fall off the wagon at the end of their careers and find themselves in really sticky spots. And I think the final part that's really an interesting but never will happen question is, do you move the draft age back a year? Right? You move it back 1 year, fundamentally to me, you completely change the environment as to which players are entering the competition. Because as it stands today, and speaking from experience, I was a child walking into an AFL environment. I was a very put together and oversized child, but I'd never looked after myself. I'd never chosen to be anywhere. I just pushed and pushed, and within the framework of school and football had succeeded at every step of the way. If you put me on the sidelines for a year, I've got to make everything up. I've got to set my own schedules. I've got to play against men. I've got to do senior footy. I've got to live by myself probably, yada, yada, yada. There's so many life things that happen in that 12 months, which I think sets players up for a far better chance of success. And a lot of players, including me, by the way, but I was in a bit of different circumstances. I walk out and people go, what do you want to do? What job can we help you get? I'm like, I don't really want to do any of your jobs, mate. I think what I'm going to do is work in the mental health space. And I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. But again, my uniqueness comes from the fact that I had a runway of money and all of that sort of stuff, whereas a lot of guys don't. But at least I had a North Star. And for me, the game is trying to help people uncover that North Star throughout their career so that they can at least step into something that resembles that once they finish, even if it might not work out at the first try.
Are these discussions being had in the AFL industry right now? Like, are they looking to implement these sort of procedures to set players up better for the future? And secondary to that as well, are they looking to also implement a mental health round? And do you think that is necessary?
I don't reckon they'll do a mental health round from what I know at this stage. They obviously have Spud's game, which is I spoke at it last year. It was an amazing experience to be a part of. And we know the Frawley family and they do a magnificent job. So I don't know any more progress about that based on my conversations. I think in regards to the conversations being had internally, I think, yes, there are certainly conversations happening. I mean, you take the horrendous 12 months we've had with ex-player suicides, and there is undoubtedly going to be a conversation going on around how we can prevent that absolute tragedy and those number of tragedies happening again, no doubt. The challenge is, that trying to change the inert momentum of the AFL is really difficult. I'll use a different example because this one's a bit easier to talk about and understand. So people will say to you, hey, you get access to the best healthcare in the world as an AFL player. We all have to wait in lines, right? Absolutely agree, right? We get access to the best surgeons as quickly as possible. Like, I had surgery once. I did compound dislocated my finger over in Adelaide. I was in surgery within about 12 hours, right? Get on a plane home, go to bed in the morning, in surgery. Fixed by the end of the day, play 5 days later. Like, no one else can get that done. I understand it. On the flip side, we also have the worst incentive structure for good healthcare decisions in the world. Because in the case of that exact example that I gave you, the best thing to do for my finger was to rest it for probably 4 to 6 weeks. And yet I put a cast on and I played within 5 days. So as much as these conversations happen, the speed of trying to sweat the asset, and the asset is your player, it's worth a lot of money to you, right? Like my contract, I'm kind of worth like a moderately sized house in Brighton. That's what I am, right? And the goal is to sweat that asset during the time that you can, which is that 25, 26-week block, and everything else comes subsequent to that. So we can have all of these discussions. The PA are certainly talking about it, trying to influence change in an insanely high pace and high performing industry that by its very nature leaves people strung by the wayside along its way. It's going to be very tricky to make massive changes, I think, in any meaningful way.
Would you say, though, that implementing a mental health round is a massive change, especially off the back of the tragic deaths that we have seen this year to past players and ongoing mental health speak outs from current players? Why is it seen to be such a massive change within the momentum of the game, and why isn't it happening?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know some stuff, some of which I can't sort of share because I can't validate it, basically. I can't promise that it's true. But I think that the goal of a mental health round is not for the players necessarily. I think it's for the players of the game, of which there's 550,000 people who play every year. But I don't think necessarily it's actually going to make a meaningful difference to the players who are out there on the field at the AFL level. But I think that as opposed to the sort of other, let's say, significant milestones or days in the calendar from a mental health point of view, the reason that the AFL mental health round and why I'm a proponent for it and why I think it could work really well is because the AFL, well, take it back a step. Australia has a distinct advantage in dealing with this stuff compared to other countries. And one of those advantages is the fact that we have a community-based sporting culture, which whatever sport that you like, that is ingrained into our regional parts of the country, into our suburban parts and our metropolitan parts. And so by nature of that, I think that there's almost this perfect distribution center for if the AFL was serious about doing a mental health round. They could then use the 12 months between these rounds that they fall each year as a meaningful way to invest in this space, to use the game to impact people in a really positive way through better support mechanisms at the club, further training, more participation. By the way, I think the game growing is probably as significant a thing for our country's mental health as just about anything else. And they'd get to a point where they actually have a possibility of being able to make that work. Difficult, but definitely possible. And so for me, I see that as the great, North Star of what could happen rather than just focusing or fixating on the players who are playing today, if that makes sense.
Shifting the conversation back to yourself, what is a area that you once believed was a weakness in who you were, but later found out was truthfully a strength?
I think I'm a very deep thinker. I think about things that I imagine probably some other people don't. And in the context of sport, that's not always ideal, right? I mean this as lovingly as I can. There's quite a few of our greats of the game who are not book smart, let's say. And there's a certain freedom to that, right? Sport is best played on instinct. No matter how smart I think I am, whether it's true or not, I'm never going to think faster than they react. And what I found is very difficult was separating those two things. How do I separate Tom the person and Tom the footballer, Tom the individual and Tom the professional, if you will? And I felt that no matter what I did on the personal side, the individual side, it didn't really matter if I couldn't get the professional part right enough, right? And that was a pretty high bar given that my contract and circumstances. And I think what I've learned is because I can think like the way that I do, and I do deeply understand the reasons why I ended up in challenging circumstances, and I spend a lot of time having thought about this, that it really helps other people understand, hopefully, the way that they're dealing with things as well. And equally, the strength of being able to understand myself, I think, really helps in me understanding other people. And in particular, being able to create environments when I do, whether it's my speaking work, my work for the business that I work for called Everperform, it doesn't really matter, in all circumstances, where people actually enjoy the experience of talking to me for the most part. Like maybe ask my wife, I don't know what she'd say. And I think that this really comes from a thing that was a big weakness for me playing footy, which is this chronic overthinking, this overanalyzing, this deep thought process that I typically had to so many of the things that I dealt with. I think it's really helped me distill down something that I think is quite simple for people to understand.
And do you still, look, probably not to the same extent, but I don't want to assume, do you still fight or manage any of the difficulties that you did when you were in your playing career? Do they still pop up from time to time, or do you find that you just have better coping strategies than you once did?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, and I think this is where some of the confusion happens, right? So from my perspective, I don't think about this stuff like some other people do who say, I live with this stuff every day, right? That's not my thoughts. I don't feel that way, which maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it doesn't matter. The thing that I think is really critical to understand is the difference between your mental health being unrelated to your environment and being completely out of control, as opposed to feeling the same sort of way, but about a specific issue that is relevant. And the example that I use when I do a lot of these speaking things is, you know, when I first experienced significant levels of anxiety, I had felt that before, but I used to call it nerves, and it used to come before a big exam or a big game of footy, right? And then I'd play the game and I'd play all right. And then, or it didn't matter if I did. And then afterwards I'd feel okay, right? You know, I'd still stress about my performance, but that's different. The problem was when it first really started to play a role in my life when I was in Sydney in 2014, I would be sitting there on a Wednesday afternoon doing nothing, and it would go for hours. And I'd be like, this is weird. And that's what I'm talking about. So if you ask me today, do I deal with frustrations? Do I deal with anxiousness when things are really happening? Do I feel stressed? Yes. I have a almost 4-year-old. I've got a house to pay off like everyone else. I just rounded out 85 speaking gigs for the year on a full-time workload, as well as doing media and, you know, this stuff and everything else. Do I have low moods at times? Do I get down and frustrated? Of course I do. But almost never, or very rarely, when it doesn't make sense as to why. And I think that's a critical thing to understand, and certainly something that I feel much more on top of now and feel like I understand why I feel the way that I do and what to do about it.
Beautiful realization, fantastic learning. And do you feel like these learnings that you speak about, that you have learned about yourself, have been understood by current footballers? Do current footballers almost approach you now and say, hey, mate, this is how I'm feeling, what do I do? Or do you take a back seat and stay away from that?
Yeah, I don't do the advice stuff much, to be honest. I think there's a lot of people selling complicated, or simple solutions to complicated problems. Just look at Instagram and you'll find 750 of them in each of the reels that you look through. And I don't get a heap of ex-players reaching out to me necessarily. I have had some in the past.
Or current players.
Yeah, same. I mean, some, but not often. Very rarely, I would say. And look, I think for me, you know, much of my work is actually, you know, leveraging obviously my time in footy to spread the message far and wide. And I don't know this for a fact, because it's very difficult to get information based on what other speakers do unless you talk to them directly, and then you have to take them at their word. But I don't know many speakers who span the breadth that I do. You know, I went from, in the last, 8 or 9 days, I've been at a council men's program, at a fathers forum, at a mental health Victoria forum, been up to a local school community event. I've spoken at a financial services conference. Mate, you name it, I've done it, right? That's just the last 10 days, and that's all year. And so my role actually is, in my opinion, to help distill down the complexities that people communicate this stuff with. Because and again, I'll say this, and I'll repeat myself, you won't find a bigger proponent for psychologists, but the ones who talk publicly, right? And I love it's great. It served me unbelievably well. The ones who talk publicly tend to talk like they're talking to their colleagues. And for me, that is a great source of frustration, because at the end of the day, if you really distill down all of the different options for a solution to these issues, every single one of them just starts with talking to someone else, right? That's as simple as it needs to be. Now, it might be talking to your friend or a professional, might be talking to yourself. At the end of the day, that's the only first step really to deal with this stuff. And when we hear these messages, mental health starts to get a brand name, if you will, for want of a better term, that is one that is built in the high rises of Melbourne and Brisbane and Sydney, rather than where this stuff is actually happening, which is in Melbourne, of course, but it's also in Ringwood, where I grew up, and it's in Benalla, where I was last week, or Shepparton, where I was the week before, or in any number of these small regional towns in Victoria or in Australia. And the more that we can make it approachable and distill down to the simplest form of what to do and when to do it, the better off that we'll be, because everyone won't feel ostracized or like they're dealing with some corporate, speak that they don't understand or resonate with in the first place.
What's something that people don't know about you that you wish they did?
I've shared a lot about me, to be honest with you. Most people. I think probably, maybe some people know this about me, but I think probably the thing that I would say to you is it is often the people who are most confident and most capable and clear in the way they communicate or the way that they act and the success that they have. It is very often those people who are able to be successful in hiding this stuff as well. And, you're almost a perfectionist in all forms of your life. So therefore you get good at all of the bad habits as well as good at all the good ones. And I think for me, we tend to still in Australia characterize success and mental health or success and happiness as a similar sort of bucket of things. And I can just tell you, fundamentally, having seen a huge cross-section of our country, including myself, these things just do not go hand in hand so often. And, I think if we consider the world that we live in, of which, materialism and the need and desire and, seeking out of financial means and gains are, put as the sort of deity of the day, so much of that stuff doesn't contribute to how we feel as people. And, I would caution many young people about seeking that goal without considering the cost.
Do you still love footy? Do you still watch it yourself and support?
I do love the game, absolutely. I do watch a bit of footy now, not anywhere near as much as I used to. And one of the reasons for that is I'm often working when these games are on, and I'm not watching half the games that were on this year because it was absolute junk time. Like some of the schedule, it's horrendous. And look, there's a whole other thing. Every ex-player is like this, right? It was better when I played, but there is an undeniable statement I can make, which I think is absolutely true and non-biased, which is the purity of the game at the AFL level is less now than what it was, right? The rule changes, the scheduling, all of that stuff is tending towards the commercialized view of it, not the history and tradition. And, as the old, bloke on the call, that frustrates me. But nonetheless, the players continue to get better. And I think that's something that I will ideally never forget, which is that every year the players will marginally get better. And yes, we'll have standouts and, fluctuations, but I still love the game. I think outside of my family and friends, it's really the most influential thing that I've ever been a part of in my life, for all great reasons and challenging ones. And it'll be part of my life, I'd say, to the day I die.
Speaking of influential, how many times a day do you watch your winning goal against the Swans in the drought-breaking flag?
Twice. Once in the morning after breakfast and one at night before I go to bed.
And do you listen to it on the multi-call, so you get BT's, Triple M?
Yeah, I don't have that many. I have to pick one basically day to day, but I can't listen to all 8 or 9 or 10 of it. No, it's a great moment. And I'm not in the game of being humble about that one. It'll go down as one of the great moments in grand final history, which I'm very proud of. And I think, yes, proud of, because all footballers are selfish in some way, shape, or form. There's not a single one who isn't, because it is such a demanding and self-oriented sport. But at the same time, you learn over time the meaning that kick has in many Bulldog supporters' lives, of which there are many of us. And the significance is less so about the moment and more so about the consequences that came afterwards, which was finally getting the success that we have dreamt and failed and scratched and clawed for the last 62 years.
Absolutely. Mate, before we wrap up, one question we like to ask our guests is, what is your sweet spot? What is something, be it recently, be it from your career, be it something coming up, that is a sweet moment of, it could be a funny story or just a great story. What is a sweet spot for you in your life, be it now, in the future, or in the past?
Look, I think probably from this year's reflection, doing Spud's game in front of 65,000 people, there's different times in my life where I have to talk to myself and be like, you are too not overconfident, but I have a very I can do anything ambitious streak, and I figure I'll figure it out. I've got other examples of that, but let's say for this was one where I looked around. I was like, there's not that many people who can do this. They asked me to do it a week beforehand, and to be able to walk out and execute, 90 seconds to 2 minutes in almost perfect fashion, with a message, I think, which was really clear and ideally really meaningful for people in front of 65,000 in a dark MCG, without being able to hear what I was saying because I didn't have any ears in. I think for me, that was one of the more proud moments that I've had, and I think it's certainly something that comes up consistently in conversation with people from around the country.
Awesome, mate. Before we wrap up, if people want to follow the awesome work that you do now, where's the best place to find you?
I'm on all of the platforms, basically all the old ones, but LinkedIn's the number one that I use today for business work and all that sort of stuff. You can find me on Instagram. I think it's TomBoyd17 or something like that. So just Google my name. It'll all come up, I think.
Tom, it's been fantastic, mate. Thank you for a ripping chat, and I'm sure the listeners will take away plenty of insights that they probably have not heard yet from you in a different kind of format. So thank you for your time, mate. We're so excited for what's to come for the future with you. We'll be following very attentively, and congratulations on the upcoming child as well.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.